And I have made my own living since I was 17 years old, never missed a paycheck in my whole life, worked for every penny I got, and to have it taken by a bureaucratic government, that is what really hurts.
The Endangered Species Act, it's a well-intentioned act that is being so misused today and abused that it's borderline criminal, I suspect, and that is wrong. You can't do that to people. You cannot do that to people.
The collateral base of all financial assets is private property. And if you destroy private property, you are destroying the very lifeblood of the economy. And who is affected most? Not the landowner. The person who ultimately is affected most is a man or woman on the street who can't get the essentials of life to live.
My family, we all own this land. It's the Sunset Ranch, and my children and myself, and my husband's deceased, and the children operate it and work it and love it, and we've lived there. It's been part of our lives for many, many years, say 60 years now. And they don't want to give it up to the government. They don't want to give it up to the birds.
Farming and ranching is inherently risky with the age-old variables of weather, disease, labor, and market swings. However, today's farmers and ranchers face a new set of variables that in many ways are more unpredictable than the traditional ones. I'm speaking of legislative and regulatory threats that can, in the stroke of a pen, take away water rights, change production techniques, and devastate land values. Today's farmer has to be as alert to threats against private property rights as the threat posed by drought or insects.
Land. It has always represented settlement and growth, opportunity and gain. It was land and the freedom it represented which lured colonists across the vast oceans to settle and face the hardships of life in the wilderness. This, then, land and ownership, formed the foundation upon which our strong national economy grew. For this very reason, our Constitution has sheltered private property rights, and those freedoms guaranteed the individual. Owning property was and remains the American dream. Yet this protection is under attack, and no invasion of property rights is more controversial than the power to take and control private property, either directly or indirectly through laws and regulations. This, then, is the issue. Do you own your property as the Constitution guarantees, or can your property, through regulation, be taken from you? Who will own the land?
We were starting to put the fence in to keep the cattle in. And then I got the letter saying that I couldn't do that. When I got this letter from the Department of the Interior, Fish and Wildlife Service, they came on me without any warning at all that I could have a stay in jail, a $25,000 to $50,000 fine, and I wasn't warned of this at all until I got this letter. And I thought it was unreal that the government could come in when we were the property owners and own this property, and we were doing it for our business, to fence cattle. I just wondered, what else can the government do to private property owners? Do you lose all of your rights on your property because there's a bird there without being warned?
Who owns Margaret Rogers' land? It seems strange that this question should be asked. After all, the right to own private property, to possess and use it, is one of our most basic constitutional rights. Yet, according to Margaret Rogers and many others, this question does need to be asked. Margaret was prohibited from building a fence on her land because of environmental regulations. Prohibiting Margaret Rogers from building a fence makes it clear that she does not have the right to decide what to do with her own land. This action raises many issues. Who should have the right to decide what Margaret can do with her land? Should Margaret be compensated if her use of the land is denied? How do we best protect the environment? What is in the best interest of the public? These and other questions lie at the heart of the debate, a debate which pits two fundamentally different points of view against each other. One is individual private property rights, which are protected under the Constitution. The other view is environmental rights, which, in the interest of the public, strives to control public and private property through regulation. These two views, strangely enough, arise from an issue on which we all agree: the desire for clean air, water, and a healthy environment. How to achieve these desires, however, is not so clear. Congress, in an attempt to protect the environment, has enacted many laws. One of these is the Endangered Species Act. Its purpose is to prevent the extinction of animal and plant species. This law, enacted in the early 70s, has become the focus of a sharp debate on who controls the land.
Because of the wide-ranging impacts of laws such as the Endangered Species Act on human activities, their enforcement is not a simple matter. Anytime Fish and Wildlife appear to be inhibiting profit-making activities or use of private resources, people's livelihoods appear to be threatened, and obviously they react adversely.
Why are private property owners' livelihoods threatened? When a new environmental law or regulation is passed, a property owner may be prohibited from certain practices dealing with his property, practices which may have been employed for generations. When these practices are stopped or altered in order to comply with the environmental regulations, landowners argue their property has been taken by the government and that they should be compensated, that this is a right provided them by the Fifth Amendment of our Constitution.
I bought this land in 1973 as an investment. It took me 10 years to pay for it, and I wanted it to supplement my retirement, and now it's of no use to me. Ever since I've gotten the letter from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, in '92, the value of my land has dropped from around $900,000 to $30,380. I can't develop it because of the golden cheek warbler. The government doesn't want to buy it because it's too small, so all I can do is pay taxes on it, and that is practically worthless.
For the most part, the burden of complying with the environmental laws and regulations has been on the property owner. But should the government compensate the landowner so that he doesn't have to bear all the costs of this regulatory impact?
We have, as the public, a right to protect those resources. We don't have to pay to protect them. The landowner has a duty to protect those resources. However, I think that we should, along with the regulation, make it easier, not make it so burdensome as it can be in some instances for private landowners to protect resources.
I believe very strongly that if it is really important to the people of the United States to preserve these endangered species and the habitat on which they depend, we ought to be willing to pay for it.
The cost of paying the landowner for protecting the environment may be more practical and less expensive than paying the many outstanding takings claims that are now in our courts. These takings claims are adding up, and Congress is very concerned.
The U.S. government is currently facing well over $1 billion in outstanding takings claims. In addition, several of the largest taking judgment in history have already been handed down, including one totaling $120 million in 1990.
Added to the cost of the takings claims are the costs of implementing environmental regulations. The expense of implementing these regulations is at least $500 billion annually. This is twice the expenditure for our national defense. Even at this level of spending, are we saving the environment?
What we have to do is realize that there's a limited budget. We're in an era of limits. There's not unlimited funding for anything. And force the biologists to begin to re-examine, or to examine for the first time very carefully, what their priorities are.
Unfortunately, environmental regulations are so rigid that in many instances it is difficult for government to find the priorities and establish trade-offs. Many people, however, consider private individuals better at protecting the environment than the government.
I don't believe that government can or does do a very good job of managing land. I think we can go and look at our national park system and to validate that. But regardless of that, there's not going to be enough money for government to manage land sufficiently anyway, and so it has to fall back on private landowners.
The reason that farmers and ranchers are good stewards of the land is because they have a deep emotional commitment to it. The commitment is multi-generational. It's not one day, it's not profit, it's to stay and maintain a way of life and a value system.
Unfortunately, private individuals have not been given a chance to prove their stewardship. Local, state, and federal government has at their disposal a vast arsenal of regulations which they must enforce. By their very number, managing these regulations is cumbersome and unwieldy. Some even say these laws cause more harm than good. One such individual who learned how burdensome regulations can be is Wayne Hage, a rancher from Tonopah, Nevada.
We bought the ranch that we own at the present time in 1978. And it has the greatest source, largest source of fresh water anywhere in central Nevada on the ranch property. We own that water. And there are other people, of course, who want that water. I was forced to go through 4 levels of an administrative appeal process with the Forest Service. Now, typically that costs between $50,000 to $200,000 to go through that process. And given the hundreds of millions of budget that they have to work with, plus the political clout of the United States Forest Service, we found ourselves fighting a very formidable enemy.
In 1990 alone, 53,000 pages of federal government regulations were issued on the use of private property. It's not hard to imagine that these regulations have placed severe limitation on private property use.
You have to recognize that there's the law, and then there's a set of regs for enforcing that law, and those regs are enforced by human beings within a government agency. And so you have, what you're seeing is the fluctuations of the perceptions, perhaps, of those different people enforcing it.
I think lack of communication, whether it be on specific issues or on the broad issue, cause most of the problems that we have. We are a relatively small agency with major responsibilities, and these responsibilities sometimes cause us to miss links in the communication chain.
We use an example like the Agricultural Extension Service, the Soil Conservation Service. You know, they have various requirements and acts that affect people's property all the time. How you can plow things, what you can do, and so forth. But the difference with those acts and the Endangered Species Act is along with those acts came individuals, money to pay individuals to be in practically every county in the state, money for incentives to do the right kinds of practices, and all those things. All those are missing in the Endangered Species Act.
Nobody wants to have habitat on their land that might attract an endangered species, because as soon as you do attract endangered species to your land, then the feds are going to come in and say you can't clear brush along your fences, or you can't clear this land to put an extension on your house, or you can't chop down trees. And the way this law works, you don't get any compensation for the loss of your land. The government just comes in and takes it away from you. Your entire investment, all your life's earnings, everything you worked for, you put into that land, goes down the drain.
These authoritative land use regulations were passed as an attempt to save the environment. These regulations, however, have turned the issue into a desperate struggle between landowners and environmentalists over who will control private property.
You know, private property rights run far deeper than just agricultural land. Well, private property rights affect every American citizen, making a difference what you own. You own some private property. You know, it may be the clothes on your back or the boots on your feet, but everybody in this country has a vested interest in the private property rights issue.
Could you just go on somebody's property anytime you wanted to? I wouldn't want people to do that to my property, and I wouldn't want it done to other people's property either.
It makes no difference if you have a piece of paper that says you have title to your property. If you do not have control of that property, you do not own that property. Whoever has control, remember the old saying, possession is 9 points of the law. Whoever has control owns that property. And if the government has control of your property through environmental regulation, they own that property.
I think there are people who don't believe in private property rights, or in fact, they don't believe in somebody else's private property rights. And I have an absolute statement about that. I say property rights are like civil rights. You can't take anybody's away without hurting everybody.
They're seeing that the approach that modern environmentalism is taking of massive government land use control, massive government regulation, and so on, is nothing more than the planned society that we've been fighting all along, and it's not going to work any more effectively to protect the environment than it worked to run an economic system. I mean, if you want to see how the planned society, how government ownership or government regulation worked, I mean, you look at the Soviet Union, you look at everything that happened behind the Iron Curtain. I mean, not only did it produce a society that had very little in the way of consumer goods, very little in the way of a productive society, very little in the way of a high standard of living. I mean, health conditions, all these things that socialism promised turned out to be largely a myth. But also it poisoned the earth, it destroyed the environment on a rate and a basis and a degree that's staggering, even by the worst conditions you can find in the West. So it showed that central planning and central control is no more a solution for the environment than it was for running an economy.
Robert Brandis, a lifelong Texas resident, felt the effects of government power when his land was taken for a park.
This was where I was going to build my home. This is where I was going to live. There were 15 acres here, and the creek split the land. And when they decided they wanted it more than we did, so to speak, and literally stole it, it doesn't make you so much bitter as it does sad to know that the system works this way. And it's happening to a lot of people all over the country. It's a very difficult place to come back to. It took me almost 5 years to set foot on it, and it's hard right now to come back to it because I had a real attachment to this property. I loved it. I still love it. That's enough. It's a tough place here.
We need to be able to plan with landowners, be they private landowners or federal agencies who are planning things on federal lands that may impact endangered species. We need the opportunity to talk, to plan, and to work out solutions, because they're there.
What we ought to be looking for is ways to reinforce the generally positive stewardship of private landowners so that, number one, those habitats will be there into the next generation, and so number two, those landowners will never face, the coercive hand of government.
I think the solutions, and this may be naive, but I think they're quite simple. One, if you want somebody's property, pay them a fair price for it, if the property's for the public good. Secondly, I think we need to get some fair interpretations of the act. The act is a good act. It has just been misapplied and mismanaged so many times that we don't even know what the act is anymore. Thirdly, I think the whole country needs to recognize, landowners, environmentalists, everybody, that we have a problem, but we need to solve it as a group and not just solve our particular problem and then let my neighbor solve his. We need to take a universal approach to it.
American farmers and ranchers are the providers of the food, clothing, and shelter of not only this country but the entire world. And these environmental regulations that are being put into place are materially challenging that individual's ability to produce. If the individual cannot produce in the manners in which they have for generations, in that case then their livelihoods are in jeopardy. The value of their property will go down. And when the value of their property goes down, the value of the farm credit systems and other lenders' collateral will accordingly go down and threaten the viability of that institution as well as the individual.
We have to bring some accountability into government. If government can come in and literally at the point of a gun confiscate my cattle, if they can confiscate my water rights, if they can render the use of my land useless by virtue of their regulation, if they can do that to me, they can do it to anybody in the country.
If we don't work with private landowners in conserving endangered species, it will not happen. You're not going to police it. You're not going to do it by regulation. You're going to have to do it by working with those private landowners.
Society is like a living organism. It changes constantly. Yet, like a living organism, for society to succeed and survive, vital basic principles must be adhered to. We, in our unique American experiment, have succeeded as a nation for one principal reason: the existence of an inviolable truth that the individual has rights, and those rights are sacred. Our forefathers saw these rights as sacred, that land was at the heart of property rights, and that property rights were at the heart of individual rights. The right to possess property, to freely give it away or sell it, to manage it, to pass it on to our children and their children, this is freedom itself. And if we lose our property, we lose our freedom. We are now poised at the edge of the 21st century, and each of us, whether from the farm or the city, must answer a vital question. The answer to this question will decide the future of our country. The question is, who will own the land? What do we tell our children? How can we best protect the environment for them? Will our children have the right to own and enjoy land? Who will own the land? How will we protect our environment? The answers to these vital questions will decide our future.